The topic for today is preterm birth. One moment of patience can save 1,000 of regret. And that is what is going to be required for today's lecture, because it's going to be a longer lecture than usual. So in case any of you wants to grab a cup of coffee or tea, now would be the right time. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to cover in preterm birth, not only preterm labor, but also preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, as well as a little bit about the preterm neonate. Okay, so let's begin. Yeah. So preterm birth is defined as birth before 37 completed weeks of gestation, and preterm labor is the onset of uterine contractions of adequate strength and frequency to cause progressive dilatation and effacement of the cervix before 37 completed weeks. Every word of this definition is extremely important. Okay, preterm births are divided into two: early preterm births taking place prior to 34 weeks of gestation, and late preterm births between 34 and 37 completed weeks. Coming to the pathogenesis, pathogenesis of any medical entity is the most important part of study, not only in terms of the causes, but also the treatment. So if you know the pathogenesis, you're going to be better equipped to handle the causes as well as the consequences. Okay. So in case of preterm labor and preterm births, it could be a pathological process, that which is generally seen in early preterm births, for example, infection or inflammation, or it could be a physiological process occurring too soon. Okay, generally seen in late preterm births. In case of preterm labor, all of you must be well acquainted with this image. Okay, it is the placental fetal adrenal endocrine cascade. It is the basis of labor in preterm as well as term patients. So what exactly happens in this cascade? Let's take a look. So there is activation of the maternal hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, giving rise to secretion of maternal cortisol. Maternal cortisol causes stimulation of the placental trophoblast secreting placental CRH, which is corticotropin releasing hormone. Placental CRH reaches the fetal adrenal glands, causing stimulation of two hormones from the fetus: fetal cortisol and DHEAS, dehydroepiandrostenedione sulfate. Both of these pass over to the placenta. Fetal DHEAS acts as a precursor for synthesis of maternal estrogens, whereas cortisol causes stimulation of trophoblasts, further causing secretion of placental CRH. So it's a feed-forward mechanism. Okay. So how does this affect the onset of labor? Any maternal stress, activation of maternal HPA axis, synthesis of cortisol. Cortisol acts on the placenta, giving rise to CRH. CRH moves over to the fetal side, stimulation of fetal adrenal glands, synthesis of two hormones, cortisol as well as DHEAS. DHEAS forms the basis of maternal estrogen secretion, and CRH further stimulates prostaglandins. Now both these cause increase in myometrial oxytocin receptors, increase in the gap junctions, increase in prostaglandins, giving rise to the triad, that is uterine contractions, cervical ripening, and rupture of membranes. All these put together give rise to preterm labor. Okay, so that is a physiological process. What happens when there is an infection or inflammation? We all know that any infection in the body or inflammation is a cause for preterm labor. Okay, so infection or inflammation causes release of cytokines or chemokines, namely interleukin 6, 8, 1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and matrix metalloproteinases. What these do in turn, matrix metalloproteinases causes degradation of the membranes, giving rise to preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. Degradation of collagen fibers in the cervix causes cervical ripening. Increased prostaglandins causes myometrial contractions. And then again, there is activation of the same cascade that we just saw, placental fetal adrenal endocrine cascade. All this put together is a cause for preterm labor. So what have we seen? In the causes, infection, inflammation we have seen. Activation of hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis we have seen. Decidual bleeding. We know that in patients of, for example, placental abruption, there are higher chances of them going into preterm labor. Okay. The cause for this is release of thrombin. So thrombin is a protease which causes stimulation of cytokines, chemokines, and ultimately leads to the same common pathogenetic pathway we just saw. Similarly, uterine stretch. Okay, we know that multifetal gestations or polyhydramnios have a higher chance of going into preterm labor. The cause for this is uterine stretch. With a uterine stretch, there is increase in the contraction associated proteins, gap junctions, oxytocin receptors, prostaglandin synthase. All these again put together give rise to the triad: increased uterine contractility, cervical ripening, as well as rupture of membranes, pushing the patient into preterm births. So broadly, the three direct causes of preterm labor or preterm birth is one, spontaneous preterm labor when the membranes are intact, preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, and iatrogenic causes, either for maternal or fetal indication. So it's going to be easy now. Don't get scared looking at this big list. It's going to be easy for you now to come to the etiology and risk factors. We're going to divide them into three: maternal causes, obstetric causes, and uterine causes. So in maternal causes, low socioeconomic status, again, high risk of infections, poor diet, poor nutrition, age less than 18, more than 40, low pregnancy weight or low BMI, smoking, substance abuse, multiparity, anxiety, stress, and other physical stressors such as anemia, fever. All of them set into action the premature activation of the maternal hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, pushing the patient into preterm labor. Obstetric causes, now these are very important for your history taking. You must know these. Prior history of preterm birth increases the recurrence rate by twofold. Prior history of second trimester pregnancy loss, again, increased risk for preterm birth in the present pregnancy. Repeated evacuations, giving rise to cervical incompetence due to cervical trauma. Iatrogenic causes in the present pregnancy like severe preeclampsia, eclampsia, IUGR, or abruption, all iatrogenic causes of preterm births. And assisted reproductive technology is also associated with higher risk of preterm labor. Coming to the uterine causes, we have already seen uterine stretch, that is hydramnios, and multifetal gestation. Uterine anomalies like bicornuate uterus or septate uterus, again, high risk for preterm labor. Any trauma or antepartum hemorrhage, we have seen placental abruption and how it releases thrombin to set into onset the preterm labor. And lastly, infection. So all ascending infections, most commonly Gardnerella, ureaplasma, mycoplasma, chlamydia, causing stimulation of cytokines, chemokines, and causing preterm labor. So coming to signs and symptoms of preterm labor, patient will come to you with abdominal pain. Okay, so it could be frequent intermittent uterine contractions or a period like cramping sensation, excessive vaginal discharge, which either could be due to infection, it could be due to leakage of amniotic fluid, backache, low back pain, pelvic pressure, and non-specific symptoms. Okay, now for organizational purposes, we are going to separate or divide patients with preterm births into two groups. Okay, so the first group is women with spontaneous preterm labor with intact membranes. This will be the first group. Second group will be preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. So we're going to see the diagnosis and management of each separately. So diagnosis of women with spontaneous preterm labor with intact membranes. So very important, history. Everyone will stress how important history is in every patient, but it is actually very important in eliciting the right history and asking the right set of questions. So history of abdominal pain. Ask for the duration of pain, the intensity of pain, and whether it is intermittent or continuous abdominal pain. Vaginal bleeding, history of vaginal bleeding or vaginal discharge. It could point towards infection, it could point towards abruption, or it could point just towards a rupture of membranes. Coming to clinical assessment, general examination, check for her pulse, check for tachycardia, check for fever, check for any pallor. All these are causes of preterm labor. Okay. For abdominal examination, for the fetal presentation, the fetal heart, and the uterine contractions. Very important. Can you please mute yourself?
monkey की कहानी सुनो.
Can you please mute yourselves? I will not be able to proceed.
अच्छा ठीक है ले. That is good.
Okay. Okay, so per abdominal examination, you all must find out how many contractions are taking place, what is the duration of each contraction, and the severity or the intensity of each contraction. Okay, this is very important. You must actually put your hand on the patient's abdomen and check for uterine contractions. It's very important. Okay, coming to post speculum examination to find out if there is any vaginal discharge or amniotic fluid leakage. And sometimes even cervical dilatation can be seen on post speculum examination. Digital vaginal examination should be done if you cannot check for cervical dilatation with a post speculum examination, as well as if it's going to affect your management as regards to the cervical dilatation, the station, the presentation, all this can be diagnosed by vaginal examination. However, remember, avoid repeated vaginal examination. It should be kept to a minimum to minimize the risk of infection. Okay. So diagnostic features, regular uterine contractions, at least one every 10 minutes, associated with effacement or dilatation of the cervix, cervical length of less than 15 millimeters on a transvaginal ultrasound, and or funneling of the internal os. This increases the risk of spontaneous preterm births. Okay. Contractions which are of sufficient frequency and intensity to effect progressive dilatation and effacement of the cervix give rise to increased chances of preterm labor. Okay, and what are the investigations to be undertaken or to be done in a patient who has been admitted with threatened preterm? A complete hemogram. Okay, so this will not only tell you the hemoglobin of the patient, it will also tell you if there is any systemic infection with leukocytosis. Okay. Urine routine culture, again, to rule out any infectious pathology. Cervicovaginal swab, again, very important because one of the causes is ascending infections. Glucose and electrolytes should be done, serum electrolytes, that is, if tocolytics are used. So we're going to discuss tocolytics in detail. So I'll be explaining this then. A few terms I would like all of you all to be familiar with. These definitions are as per the RCOG definitions or the NICE guidelines of 2015. First is suspected preterm labor. Okay, so when symptoms of preterm labor are present and clinical assessment, which includes the PS and PV, confirms the possibility of preterm labor but rules out established labor, it is called suspected preterm labor or threatened preterm labor. Okay, diagnosed preterm labor, suspected preterm labor with a positive diagnostic test for preterm labor is called a diagnosed preterm labor. Okay, so what are the diagnostic tests? We'll be seeing these diagnostic tests. Established preterm labor, cervical dilatation of more than 4 centimeters with regular uterine contractions is established preterm labor, right? So patient comes to you, she has given you a history of abdominal pain, you have done a clinical assessment, a per abdominal, per vaginal examination, you have come to the diagnosis of suspected preterm labor. What do you do next? Okay, so if she is less than 30 weeks of gestation, you will treat her as a preterm labor patient. Okay, her management will be that of a preterm labor. If she is more than or equal to 30 weeks of gestation, cervical length should be measured using a transvaginal ultrasound. If this is not available, only then will you go in for a fetal fibronectin. Okay, so how do you interpret both of these? So cervical length on transvaginal ultrasound will give you the likelihood of birth within 48 hours. Okay, so if the cervical length is more than 15 millimeters, there are lesser chances of birth in the next 48 hours. So depending upon the symptoms of the patient, the clinical assessment and your clinical judgment, you will decide whether you want to admit her in the hospital or you want to reassure her and send her home and ask her to follow up if symptoms persist. However, if cervical length is less than or equal to 15 millimeters, treat her as a diagnosed patient of preterm labor. Coming to fetal fibronectin. Now, what is fetal fibronectin? Okay. Fetal fibronectin is found in cervicovaginal secretions when the membranes are intact just prior to onset of labor. It reflects stromal remodeling of the cervix. Okay. it is done, you have to take a vaginal swab, a posterior fornical vaginal swab, and an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay is performed. If the test shows a value of more than 50 nanograms per milliliter, it is considered as a positive test. However, this should be done only in cases with intact membranes and if transvaginal ultrasound is not available for finding out the cervical length. It is not a screening modality. So do not use it in asymptomatic women with a previous high risk or any high risk for preterm labor. It is not a screening test. It is just a predictive test for preterm labor. If positive, the patient in there is then a diagnosed patient of preterm labor. So this was regarding spontaneous onset preterm labor with intact membranes. Coming to the second group, diagnosis of women with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. Okay, very typical history, presence of excessive vaginal discharge or a gush of watery fluid. Okay, in your history, very specifically ask for the nature of the fluid and secondly the duration. Since when is she experiencing this? This is very important in cases with PPROM. Secondly, history is important to differentiate from stress urinary incontinence as well as vaginal discharge, which sometimes is normal in pregnancy, and sometimes vaginal discharge, which is foul smelling in cases of infection. Okay, so in stress urinary incontinence, she will typically say that on coughing or increase in intra-abdominal pressure, there is escape of fluid. Okay, for this you need to do a clinical speculum examination to find out exactly where the fluid is exiting from. So let's get to the speculum examination. On speculum examination, if you find that there is a very obvious pooling of amniotic fluid, no further diagnostic test is required to be done. Give the patient prophylactic antibiotics and then proceed to management as that of PPROM. Okay, if patient is giving you a history of vaginal discharge or gush of watery fluid, but on per speculum examination there is no pooling of amniotic fluid, that is when you go in for diagnostic tests. Okay, so very important tests which all of you all must know. These are the newer tests which have come into the market. First is insulin-like growth factor binding protein 1, marketed as Actim Partis test in the market. And second is placental alpha microglobulin 1, which is marketed as AmniSure. Both of them have very high sensitivity and specificity. Other traditional tests which used to be done previously, nitrazine test and Fern test. So in nitrazine test, it is based on the principle that amniotic fluid is alkaline in nature, vaginal secretions are acidic in nature. So in the presence of an alkaline medium, nitrazine paper will change color from yellow to blue. Okay, but these are no longer used very frequently now because of the newer tests which are available. So as I said, both these tests have very high specificity and sensitivity. They come in the form of a kit, okay, just like a pregnancy kit, which has three components. One is this Dacron swab. There's a Dacron swab for taking a swab from just inside the external os. Okay, so you take a swab and you put it in this buffering medium. So there is this vial with a buffering medium. Put in the Dacron swab inside and vigorously shake it. Okay, once it's out, use this dipstick and put it inside the buffering medium. Read the result after 5 minutes, just like a pregnancy test. A single line will tell you that it is a negative test. Double line will tell you that it is a positive test. So after these tests, how do you interpret it and how do you manage the patient depending on this? So if the test is positive, which means there is a rupture of membranes, the decision has to be taken as per the clinical status of the patient, her gestational age, medical history, obstetric history, okay? And definitely consider prophylactic antibiotics. If the test is negative, well and good. No antibiotics are required. Patient can be sent home if she's asymptomatic, and she should be asked to return if there are any further symptoms, right? Coming to complications of preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. One is chorioamnionitis, which is one of the most dreaded complications. Endometritis, placental abruption due to sudden decompression, cord prolapse, again due to sudden rupture of membranes, prolonged oligohydramnios. So sometimes in some cases, there is a high amniotic membrane leak, which sometimes reseals on its own. So in this situation, there will be no continuous leakage of amniotic fluid, and there will be no prolonged oligohydramnios. But in some cases where the leak does not reseal, okay, like a low amniotic fluid membrane leak, and there is continuous escape of fluid, there will be prolonged oligohydramnios, which is not good. It can lead to cord compression and pulmonary hypoplasia in the fetus, especially if it takes place in the second trimester, okay, when the lungs are just being formed. Okay, so early neonatal sepsis and cerebral palsy in the neonate, again, increased chances if there is an evidence of chorioamnionitis in the mother. Okay, so how do you manage these patients now? Management of patients with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. So there is a history which is suggesting a sudden gush of fluid or continuous leakage of fluid. The patient is telling you that she's having a continuous wet sensation or inability to stop urinating. You go in for a physical examination, you check for pooling of amniotic fluid, check for newer tests now. Nitrazine paper was an old test. Check for leakage from the cervical os. Ask the patient to cough. Put in a slight fundal pressure and check if there is any gush of fluid or leakage from the cervical os. Perform an ultrasonography for amniotic fluid index, and then decide whether it is PROM or it is not PROM. If it is confirmed that there is no preterm rupture of membranes, discharge the patient home, provided the fetal heart tracing is reassuring and no evidence of preterm labor. However, if preterm PROM is confirmed, if you have the facilities, you can deliver the patient there. But if you don't, you need to transport the patient to a tertiary facility where there is availability of an NICU, of a neonatologist, and where she will get optimum care. Okay. Now, management or delivery of patients with preterm PROM actually depends on the gestational age of the patient. Okay. So whether she is between 24 to 31 weeks, 32 to 33 weeks, or more than 34 weeks. However, in all these cases, irrespective of gestational age, if there is any evidence of intra-amniotic infection, that is chorioamnionitis, non-reassuring fetal heart rate, significant abruption, cord prolapse, or active labor, you need to expedite delivery of the patient, irrespective of her gestational age. Otherwise, you can give her a conservative management depending upon her gestational age. So between 24 and 31 weeks of gestation, administer corticosteroids, administer antibiotics, try to push the patient till 34 weeks before delivering her, but with strict monitoring of the mother for signs of chorioamnionitis or infection. Okay. Similarly, with 32 to 33 weeks, administer corticosteroids, definitely administer antibiotics, consider delivery at 34 weeks, but with strict monitoring of the mother. After 34 weeks of gestation, corticosteroids can be given, but you don't need to conserve the patient. Once the course of corticosteroids is over, start with antibiotics and deliver the patient, because ideally fetal pulmonary maturity has already been achieved. Okay. Group B streptococcal prophylaxis. Okay, so here we don't do, in India, we don't do a routine screening for group B streptococcal infection. However, in patients with previous babies affected with group B streptococcus, or any culture report like urine culture report or a vaginal swab culture report has shown presence of group B streptococcus, then prophylaxis should be given during labor to prevent transmission to the baby in the form of penicillin G 5 grams intravenously. Okay. Now, conservative management. Most important in conservative management is a balance between the fetal immaturity and the risk of maternal infection. Okay, so you have to strike a perfect balance in this. Okay, give corticosteroids, give antibiotics, but strict monitoring of the patient has to be done with respect to clinical features such as fever, tachycardia, foul smelling vaginal discharge, uterine tenderness. All these point towards chorioamnionitis. C-reactive protein levels and WBC count should be sent, and it should be clinically correlated. Okay, not a standalone report should not be accepted. It should be clinically correlated, and then you decide for delivery of the patient. Fetal heart rate, biophysical profile, any incidence of cord compression or prolapse, any abruption, any active labor, any of these present, you must expedite a delivery. You must stop the conservative management and expedite delivery of the patient. What is the role of antibiotics now? Very important. Prophylactic antibiotics should be offered only to women with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes and not to patients with spontaneous preterm labor with intact membranes. Okay, so this is what the NICE guidelines, that is the RCOG college guidelines, which have been updated in August 2019, have said. This guideline is based on a very important study which was performed in 2001. So this was Oracle 1 study and Oracle 2 study. Oracle 1 study said prophylactic antibiotics in PPROM decrease neonatal deaths, adverse cerebral outcomes like cerebral palsy, lung disease like bronchopulmonary dysplasia in neonates. Whereas Oracle 2 study, which studied the prophylactic antibiotics in spontaneous preterm labor with intact membranes, there was no effect of antibiotic on neonatal morbidity and mortality. Okay, so this is why these guidelines have come into being. So which antibiotics to prefer? Tablet erythromycin 250 mg 4 times a day for a maximum of 10 days or till established labor onset. That is regular uterine contraction, cervical length more than 4 centimeters. Whichever is sooner, you consider that and then give it until then. If erythromycin is contraindicated or not tolerated in the patient, then second line is oral penicillin, amoxicillin or ampicillin. 500 mg twice a day should be given for a maximum of 10 days or till established labor onset, whichever is sooner. But remember, co-amoxiclav, that is amoxicillin plus clavulanic acid, should not be given due to increased incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis in neonates. Very important. This was one of the study results in Oracle 1 study. Okay, so avoid this antibiotic. So management of preterm labor can be divided into 2 parts. So patient assessment part is based on your clinical judgment of uterine activities, rupture of membranes, whether there is any vaginal bleeding, what is the dilatation of the cervix, effacement of the cervix, presentation and station of the baby. And second part, which we are going to see in the further slides, specific management strategy. So tocolysis, corticosteroids, antibiotics if indicated, which we have already seen, and magnesium sulfate for neuroprotection. Okay, so these are the 4 parts which the next part of the lecture is divided in. Coming to tocolysis. So for tocolysis, you must keep in mind whether she is a suspected preterm labor or diagnosed preterm labor. Gestational age is very important. Consideration of steroids, again, very important. Tocolysis can be used for a short-term period so that effect of steroids can be benefited from. Availability of NICU, so need for in utero transfer, again, tocolysis is very useful in these conditions. And make sure there are no contraindications to tocolysis, which includes vaginal bleeding, any infection like chorioamnionitis, established labor. There's no point in giving her tocolysis once she's already in established labor. Pregnancy-induced hypertension, especially severe preeclampsia, eclampsia, and abruption. Okay, so tocolysis has a better short-term benefit than a long-term benefit in prolongation of pregnancy. Okay, no ideal tocolytic exists. We're going to study a number of tocolytics, but there is no ideal tocolytic. You must choose the tocolytic depending upon your patient characteristics. So you have to individualize it. Avoid a combination of tocolytics because each tocolytic has its own side effects. And if you're going to combine them, it's not going to increase the beneficial effect. It's only going to increase the side effects. Indications for tocolytic therapy: regular uterine contractions of sufficient frequency, strength, and duration to cause a progressive dilatation and effacement of the cervix. Cervical dilatation should be less than 4 centimeters, that is, she should not be in established labor. Effacement of 50%. Maternal condition should be stable. Fetal heart rate should be normal. Okay, so this was what Foxy Focus updates in 2017 had highlighted in their issue. Again, important. Insufficient evidence to support tocolytic therapy for women with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, as there was an increase in maternal chorioamnionitis without significant benefits to the infant. So what Cochrane Review 2014 has said is that avoid giving tocolytic therapy in PPROM patients. And since it's a Cochrane review, it is absolutely, you cannot argue with it. So avoid giving tocolytic therapy in patients with PPR1. So what are the drugs used in tocolytics? So there are a number of drug classes. We have beta mimetics, in which we have Ritodrin, terbutaline, which used to be used previously, but because of major side effects, they are not used very often now. Another beta mimetic not mentioned here, but I will be discussing it, is isoxsuprine. Okay. Next, calcium channel blockers, nifedipine. Magnesium sulfate is also used as a tocolytic agent, but it has a bigger role in neuroprotection in preterm deliveries. So we'll be taking a look at that. Oxytocin receptor antagonist, atosiban. It's a wonderful drug, very effective. However, cost is an issue, a slight issue. Prostaglandin inhibitors like indomethacin and nitrates, for example, nitroglycerin. Patches also can be used, but currently it is limited to research trials. Okay. So let's look at three important drugs. First one of them being nifedipine. So the dose of nifedipine is 30 mg loading dose in acute preterm labor, followed by 10 to 20 mg 6 hourly till the uterus is quiet. Okay, till cessation of uterine contractions. Contraindications, since it's a calcium channel blocker, cardiac and renal disease, hypotension, avoid concomitant use with magnesium sulfate because both of them will cause hypocalcemia and it will unmask a sudden cardiac arrest. So avoid concomitant use with magnesium sulfate. Nifedipine should be used only for acute phase of preterm labor, not as a maintenance therapy and not for prophylactic use before uterine contractions have set in. Okay, so this is what ACOG had recommended in their practice bulletin in 2016. Okay. Also, another important point about nifedipine is that its use in preterm labor is an off-label use. Okay, it is not licensed for this indication. However, it's effective, but they have given it as a disclaimer on the strip itself that it is not supposed to be used in pregnancy. And if used, the responsibility will be of the user. So when you're using this drug, please be very careful. Isoxsuprine, it is a beta sympathomimetic agent. ACOG now recommends beta sympathomimetic agents as the first line treatment in management of preterm labor. Okay, so isoxsuprine is used very frequently, but it has a number of adverse effects. Dosing, it can be given intravenously, intramuscularly, or orally. So intravenous infusion is generally preferred in cases of acute onset of preterm labor. So it comes in vials of 10 mg. So 40 mg, that is 4 vials. In 500 ml, 5% dextrose or RL can be used. You start the drip with 8 to 10 drops per minute, just like you start oxytocin drips. Increase it by 8 drops every 15 minutes till the uterus is quiescent. Okay, so you have to titrate it as per the patient response. Continue the dose at which uterine quiescence has been achieved for a total of 24 hours. And maximum dose is 0.5 mg per minute. Intramuscular dose should be used only if IV facilities are not available in your setup. Then 10 mg every 1 to 2 hourly till uterine quiescence. This is in acute preterm labor. Oral dose, it should be given as a maintenance therapy only after IV or IM administration. So the dose is 60 to 80 mg daily to be given in divided doses for maintenance therapy. So very important, when the patient is on an isoxsuprine drip, monitor her pulse, her blood pressure, respiratory rate, as well as chest auscultation. Very important because it has a number of adverse effects due to action of beta agonist agent on other beta receptors elsewhere in the body. For example, the heart as well as the blood vessels. So this can cause hypotension, tachycardia, cardiac arrhythmias due to hypokalemia, pulmonary edema, dizziness, nausea, vomiting. So you have to be very careful while administration of this drug. Contraindications would be cardiovascular disease and hyperthyroidism. Avoid it in these patients. Coming to atosiban, which is an oxytocin receptor antagonist. The regimen recommended by RCOG is a 3-step procedure. Okay, so an initial bolus of 6.75 mg to be given slowly over 1 minute, followed by an infusion of 18 mg per hour for 3 hours. And after 3 hours, you reduce the dose to 6 mg per hour for up to 45 hours. Okay, so maximum dose which can be given is 330 mg, right? Atosiban has effectiveness in delaying birth for up to 7 days. Okay, it is a wonderful drug. It is very effective, but cost is a factor because you require very large dosage of the regimen has a very large dosage. So tocolytics, while tocolytics may not be indicated in all cases of spontaneous preterm labor, evidence exists that they are definitely superior to placebo. Okay, especially between 22 and 26 weeks of gestation, every day gained in utero is associated with a 3% increase in survival. Okay, so you have to give the baby a fair chance for fighting this out. Okay, select the appropriate agent as per individual patients. So whereas ACOG recommends beta-mimetic as the first line agent, RCOG recommends nifedipine as well as atosiban as first line agents. This again depends on your patient and patient characteristics. Okay. Next, coming to corticosteroids, most important drug in the management of preterm labor. Okay, helps in fetal lung maturity and has a number of advantages. It reduces chances of respiratory distress syndrome, intraventricular hemorrhage, necrotizing enterocolitis, decreases the need for mechanical ventilation after birth, decreases incidence of systemic infection in the first 48 hours after birth, that is early neonatal sepsis, as well as an overall decrease in perinatal and neonatal death. Okay, the injections to be used: betamethasone intramuscular injection, 2 doses of 12 mg each, 24 hours apart, and dexamethasone, the doses 4 doses of 6 mg each, 12 hourly. Okay, both of them are equally effective, and both of them have shown to decrease the neonatal morbidity as well as mortality. Okay, so NICE guidelines 2015 offer maternal corticosteroids to all women between 24 and 36 weeks of gestation who are in suspected, diagnosed or established preterm labor or have a planned preterm birth or PPROM. Okay, so administration of corticosteroids has been advised till 36 weeks of gestation as opposed to the previous 34 cutoff. And between 23 and 24 weeks of gestation, okay, that is the periviable period. Sorry. So that is the periviable period. Corticosteroids should be considered only if you're sure that your NICU has the capability of resuscitation. Counsel the patients and relatives about the short-term and long-term morbidities associated with birth in this periviable gestational period, and provided you have their consent for aggressive resuscitation. Certain very important points regarding corticosteroids, which also bust a few myths which we have. Corticosteroid therapy is not associated with chorioamnionitis, and single course, that is 2 doses of betamethasone or 4 doses of dexamethasone, can be given to patients with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. Okay, corticosteroid therapy effective if birth is delayed for at least 24 hours after the first dose of steroid. However, if the first dose should be given irrespective of whether further doses can be given or not. Okay, because even a single dose for less than 24 hours has significant effect. So if a patient comes to you already in active labor at, for example, 33 weeks of gestation, please give her the first dose of steroid, irrespective of whether you can repeat the second dose or not. Okay, because even a single dose has a significant benefit in reduction of neonatal morbidity and mortality, right? Coming to the rescue dose, a single rescue dose can be considered at less than 34 weeks if the previous course of steroids was given at least 2 weeks before, and that too in patients with intact membranes. Patients with ruptured membranes do not repeat this single rescue dose. And last, steroids should be used very cautiously in diabetics because they cause hyperglycemia. If your patient is on insulin, you might even have to, for some time, increase the dose of insulin. Okay. Magnesium sulfate neuroprotection. Now, magnesium sulfate, most of you must already be practicing this, is used as a neuroprotective agent for prevention of cerebral palsy and reducing the severity of cerebral palsy in preterm neonates. So after a convincing and overwhelming evidence from a very important study, that was the BEAM study, beneficial effect of antenatal magnesium sulfate, done in 2008, magnesium sulfate was advised by ACOG for neuroprotection. So its use is before 32 weeks of gestation if you're anticipating birth, and to be used in established labor, established preterm labor, or a planned preterm birth in the next 24 hours. And what is the dose that how do you give it? 4 grams. It's just like what you use for PIH patients. 4 grams intravenous bolus of magnesium sulfate over 15 to 20 minutes, followed by an intravenous infusion of 1 gram per hour until the birth or for 24 hours, whichever is sooner. So if the baby delivers before 24 hours, you stop it there. If the baby does not deliver for 24 hours, you stop the drip after 24 hours. Okay. Important to monitor for clinical signs of magnesium toxicity at least every 4 hours. So pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, deep tendon reflexes, and urine output. We do not want her to land up into magnesium toxicity. And the antidote for magnesium toxicity is calcium gluconate. Okay. Another interesting aspect of preterm labor is the use of prophylactic progesterone and prophylactic cervical cerclage. When to do it, when not to do it, how much is it effective? So with the history, so these are NICE guidelines, and they have also been agreed upon by American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Okay, so history of spontaneous preterm birth in a previous pregnancy or mid-trimester loss, consider prophylactic vaginal progesterone. Okay. If on a routine anomaly scan between 16 and 24 weeks, you find that the cervical length is 25 millimeters or less, then again, consider prophylactic vaginal progesterone. However, if both of these are present, that means the patient has a previous spontaneous preterm birth, for example, at 30 weeks, and in this pregnancy, her cervical length is only 2 centimeters, done between 16 and 24 weeks, then you can either consider prophylactic vaginal progesterone or a prophylactic cervical cerclage. Okay. So which progesterone to use? Prophylactic progesterone can be either a vaginal natural micronized progesterone, 100 to 200 mg daily dose, at least until 34 weeks, or you can give her weekly injections of 17-alpha hydroxyprogesterone caproate, okay, until 36 weeks as advised by ACOG. Okay. Now, how useful is this? So to study that, there were 2 important studies, huge studies which took place. One, and you all must know about these, Optimum study, which was the largest study for vaginal progesterone prophylaxis, and Prolong international trial to test 17-alpha hydroxyprogesterone as a prophylactic agent to prevent preterm labor. And unfortunately, both these studies failed to show an effective role of either 17-alpha hydroxyprogesterone or vaginal progesterone to prevent preterm labor. However, it was said that these studies were underpowered and had an element of selection bias, which is why these study results were not considered while changing the guidelines. So the guidelines did not change after these studies, and the guidelines remain the same until further studies come into being. Okay, so if you all want a topic to study, you all can use this. Okay, you can actually have a good study in your center if you all have a good number of patients. Coming to prophylactic cervical cerclage. Okay, all patients with cervical length less than or equal to 25 millimeters on transvaginal ultrasound between 16 and 24 weeks, along with a previous history of PPROM or a history of cervical trauma prior to this pregnancy, prophylactic cervical cerclage should be done. Okay, this is what was recommended by RCOG and NICE guidelines in 2015. History of cervical trauma includes cervical conization or possible cervical dilatation or repeated evacuations in previous pregnancy, especially second trimester, or a large loop excision of the transformation zone. Okay, so all these are history of cervical trauma, which can give rise to cervical incompetence. What is a rescue cerclage? Rescue cerclage is an emergency procedure done between 16 and 28 weeks of gestation in patients with premature cervical dilatation and exposed unruptured fetal membrane. So each and every word here also is very important. Okay, when do you not do it? If there are signs of infection, if there is any active vaginal bleeding, Presence of uterine contractions, do not do a rescue cerclage. In established labor, again, no rescue cerclage. And in cases of anomalous baby, no rescue cerclage. So basically, appropriate patient selection and counseling regarding the procedure is very important. Okay, coming to the last part of the lecture, that is delivery principles. Okay, this is, I think, the most practical part of the lecture. Cesarean section has no harm or benefit as compared to vaginal delivery, as opposed to the popular belief. It is not proven to reduce intracranial hemorrhage in preterm babies. Okay, this is evidence-based. Cesarean section, however, is indicated in preterm breech deliveries. Very important. Monitoring of the fetus during labor, especially with CTG or intermittent auscultation, is important for an early diagnosis of hypoxia and acidemia to prevent sepsis and intraventricular hemorrhages. A slow and controlled delivery, that is second stage of labor, should be slow and completely under your control. It's very important to prevent sudden compression and decompression of the fetal head. Episiotomy can be considered in cases with increased perineal resistance. However, routine episiotomy of forceps delivery in all preterm births to protect the fragile head of the babies is not supported by evidence. Okay, so you have to use your judgment. It is not like every preterm delivery needs to undergo an episiotomy. Pent-use is contraindicated in preterm deliveries. Cord clamping, at least 30 seconds you can wait, but not more than 3 minutes. Otherwise, there will be hypervolemia in the preterm babies before clamping the cord, provided the mother and baby both are stable. But if a preterm baby needs immediate resuscitation or there is significant maternal bleeding, consider milking the cord, clamping it and cutting it as soon as possible. Okay. Leave at least 10 to 12 centimeters of umbilical cord length while cutting it in case an umbilical catheterization is required later. So these babies, preterm babies, sometimes do require exchange transfusion. Sometimes their veins are not very accessible. So for arterial blood gas sampling, they do require umbilical catheterization. Okay, coming to the end product of our lecture, that is the preterm neonate. What are the complications suffered by this tiny baby? One is hypothermia. As you can see, the body is very small and the head is bigger as compared to the body. So the surface area of the head is larger. This gives rise to hypothermia due to decreased subcutaneous and brown fat, decreased buccal fat, thin skin, large head with separated sutures. Second, sluggish reflexes due to immature CNS. Intraventricular hemorrhage, periventricular leukomalacia due to high incidence of hypoxia. Neonatal sepsis, again very prone. Necrotizing enterocolitis, respiratory distress syndrome, very common in preterm neonates due to lack of pulmonary surfactant, and hence corticosteroids are extremely important in these babies. Hypoglycemia due to poor glycogen stores, hyperbilirubinemia, often requiring phototherapy, retinopathy of prematurity, again due to oxygen therapy or hyperoxia. So do not maintain, try to maintain the oxygen saturation of these neonates to around 90%. Nutritional deficiencies, hypoproteinemia and hypocalcemia. Okay, and I promise you this is the last slide. Neonatal resuscitation. I'm just going to highlight important points, just in case your pediatrician or neonatologist doesn't arrive in time, you should know what is to be done immediately after the baby is born, because these first few minutes after delivery are extremely important for the baby. So clear the airway, first the oral cavity and then the nose or the nasopharynx. Dry the baby, keep it in a radiant warmer if available, and stimulate. Okay. Check for heart rate, auscultate and check for heart rate. If the heart rate is less than 100 or the baby is gasping, has apnea, start positive pressure ventilation, that is bag and mask ventilation, along with SpO2 monitoring. Recheck the heart rate. Okay, if it is more than 100, well and good. However, if the heart rate falls to less than 60 anytime, consider intubation with chest compressions. Okay, if it is persistently low, then IV epinephrine can be considered. So by this time, I hope the pediatrician or neonatologist will come and take over. And this is why it is so important to have a pediatrician or neonatologist during delivery of preterm babies. Okay, so always inform them when a preterm baby is being delivered. Okay, so ultimately the take home message, corticosteroids play a very vital role in preterm deliveries. Tocolysis should be used for short-term benefit in selected patients. Magnesium sulfate has a definitive proven role in neuroprotection. Prophylactic antibiotics should be given in PPROM. Cesarean section is not indicated in preterm labor without any other risks. More evidence is required for prophylactic role of progesterone and cervical cerclage to prevent preterm labor. And your pediatrician or neonatologist must always be present for immediate preterm baby or neonatal resuscitation and care.